Thank you everyone for joining us tonight. We are doing a lot, so there is a lot to talk about. We may actually be a little bit pressed for time. We're very grateful to have our Grand President, Billy Madelon, joining us tonight. And I am going to start off by turning it over to Billy and let him say a few opening remarks and take us through the initial part of our session tonight. So Billy, over to you.
Thank you, Brian. Can you hear me okay?
We can.
Okay, well, I apologize to everybody that my mug isn't seeable during this. I am characteristically technologically challenged. I've never been accused of being the prettiest girl at the dance, so I think my words will be prettier than my face anyway. So it's good to see everybody. And before we get into the key topics for tonight, I want to make sure that the following dates are on everybody's calendar. These are the primary opportunities for us to share what's going on with SigEp and talk with you about where you see potential for us to be a better organization, better support our undergraduate brothers. First of all, Stakeholder Calls. We're going to do these 2 times per year on the second Wednesday of April and the second Wednesday of October. What is this? What is it? Well, you know, we'll share big picture updates from the last 6 months, progress toward our strategic plan, and we'll do a Q&A. And we, of course, invite all of our volunteers and donors to who've been doing the work for these past 2 years to join us. We're going to be having a budget call. It'll be the second Wednesday of July. This is to share details about the budget for the fiscal year. The fiscal year begins beginning of July, and the board will adopt a budget in June. We're allocating resources to have the greatest impact possible in the upcoming academic year. Post-COVID, there are challenges, as you can imagine. We'll also share how those allocation decisions may differ from prior years and why. And I think you should tune in because we're looking at making some changes and trying some new things. We are continuing to do our Off Script on Purpose video series with Heather and myself. Every 4 to 6 weeks, we have a conversation. We sometimes have a guest who comes and joins us. We dive into important topics that involve SigEp land. These topics are often related to our strategic priorities, but they're frank conversations, which I hear folks say loud and clear that they appreciate. We talk about what we're doing. We talk about where we're succeeding, where we're challenged, the opportunities that lie ahead. So the next episode is about the big picture results from our brotherhood assessment that was conducted back in the fall. I think you're going to find those results to be terrifically interesting and also a little counterintuitive. I did. Our Off Script on Purpose has Gentry McCreary there, and we talk in detail about those things with the man himself. And so when you see an opportunity to look at that, please do. We're going to have some program impact reports. We're going to send these via email 60 to 90 days following each program. And basically what we're going to be doing is sharing key statistics and data and insight from the leadership programs as they occur. And after each program, we ask ourselves really basically one question: what does the data tell us? Is the program working? Is it accomplishing what we set out to do? How can we make it better? Should the program be expanded, and how should we finance that expansion if so? Our volunteer surveys. A survey will be sent out 1 time a year toward the end of the academic year to all of our volunteers. So just about everybody on this call tonight should be getting one. And this will be an opportunity for you to share feedback on the quality of service from the staff and fraternity officials, and help us identify what SigEp can do to better support you and our undergraduate brothers. Those survey results and the analysis will be shared and referenced during the budget call in July. And then we have our board meeting updates. Now, we intend to continue to invite you into our national board meetings as we did in December. After each meeting, once approved, the minutes are also going to be posted online. We'll have our committee updates. As many of you are aware, in fact, many of you serve, we have some standing committees that are doing some really awesome skill-based work on some of the most important issues facing the fraternity today. Committees have been reporting out to the board on a regular basis, but this is an area where we've heard your feedback. You want to know more about the progress on these committees and the important work that they're doing, like mental health, diversity, equity, and inclusion, our growth committee, volunteer engagement, etc. Our committee chairs are now preparing quarterly updates on their progress for the board, and we'll find the best way to disseminate that important information beginning this spring. Brian?
Thank you, Billy. So I just want to reiterate what Billy walked us through. You've shared with us that you'd like to learn more, you want to see greater transparency, and we want to have more conversations with you. And we want to have a consistent calendar available so that there is some opportunity to do that throughout the year, and when those opportunities will occur. So hopefully this is some good news for everyone, and that we see more and more faces on these types of calls and have more interactions with you throughout the year as we roll these types of engagements out. So I'll move on. Again, thank you, Billy, and I'll talk a little bit about tonight. As we work through our updates, you're likely going to hear a few themes. One, you're going to hear some consistent reference to our strategic plan. You just did from Billy, and you're going to hear it being used as a roadmap for our future. Two, you're going to hear a focus on engaging more alumni and dramatically increasing the number of volunteers supporting the SigEp experience. Volunteers are critical to achieving every objective of our strategic plan, and you should notice that the things we're talking about doing align with that belief. Thirdly, you're going to hear that we're trying new things. Billy also mentioned this in his opening. The times we are in demand that we do so. And we may stumble a little as we do these new things for the first time, but we also promise that if that's the case, we're going to learn and we're going to adjust quickly. And then lastly, you're going to hear reference to numbers as we continue to ground our decision-making in data and thoughtful feedback from stakeholders across the country. So that said, I want to start off with an update on membership and growth. This is the first priority in our strategic plan. Why? Well, size is an indication of our relevance on today's college campus. And if we're able to attract and recruit young men to join our chapters, that is an indication that we're offering them something they value. If we're able to retain them, we're demonstrating an ability to provide them value throughout their collegiate experience, which is fundamental to their wanting to volunteer or to donate as an alumnus. This focus is particularly important at a time when the data is telling Greek organizations that they have to undergo some significant changes in order to be relevant again. Interest among incoming freshman students in joining a Greek organization is at an historic low, according to UCLA's annual survey of incoming students. And nationwide, only 8% of men in college are joining fraternities on campuses that have them. We're also seeing that Abolish Greek Life and other movements are shining a light on systemic issues that portray fraternities as archaic and unnecessary on today's campuses. And these groups are demanding that they're demanding change while deterring undergraduate men and women from a Greek experience, which is driving rush participation down and causing some chapters to simply surrender their charters. And this is happening as experts in higher education are projecting declining enrollment and major shift in student demographics. Now, to be clear, we believe that the SigEp experience is more relevant and more necessary than ever. But all of what I've just shared demands that we take a long, hard look at what we're doing today, and if we're positioning ourselves for success 5 to 10 years from now. So how are we doing that given the environmental issues that I just referenced? And what are we going to be doing differently? And I'll start with the first question of how are we doing today? Last month, we completed our periodic membership report, which is essentially SigEp's census. It's a snapshot of membership as of March 1. And it's something that we've been doing for years so that we can use this data to have some historical reference points. This year's PMR came in at 11,521 total members. Last year's was 11,032 members, which represents a 489 member increase, roughly a 4.4% growth year over year. And that is despite a decrease of 7 chapters year to year. The average chapter grew by almost 5 men, which is what you can see on the screen here. And we've returned to a pre-pandemic average chapter size. The average chapter size today is just over 59 men, which is about 5.8 less than what it was at our high in 2014, but 8.4 men greater than what it was at our low in 2004. And of course, I'm just referencing performance since 2000 when I give you these numbers. In terms of new members, we anticipate new membership to top 4,700 by fiscal year end, which would be a 15% increase over our prior year. But the interesting thing to point out is what we're doing to date, and that's 4,544 new members recruited as of today. At this time last year, we were at 3,609, so a 26% increase. This time 2 years ago, we were at 4,230, so about a 7% increase over that pre-pandemic year, or the year where the pandemic started in the spring. So those are good signs, not what we want to see long-term, but we've reversed a trend that we were seeing that was around membership shrinking and consistent drops and new members recruited. So what are we going to be doing differently to ensure that we can keep that trend going in a positive direction? Well, growth is a combination of recruiting more new members, retaining more members, and keeping chapters open and healthy as we start new chapters. And I think everyone on the call knows that. Our strategies are developed to improve our performance in each of those areas. So again, new member recruitment, member retention, keeping chapters open and starting new chapters, so total chapters. These pathways to growth have impacted our approach, not just to strategy development, but also to staffing next year. And I want to share some of those changes with you. Specifically, we're going to continue to have our regional directors and our chapter and volunteer services directors, of course, but we're going to be focusing more of their time on helping chapters attract and retain members who are motivated by the right thing. And I've added that last phrase intentionally because our research with dyad strategies, some of the information that we get through the Brotherhood survey tells us that members who are motivated by the right things like belonging and development and building a network of friends leads to chapters that are just all around better chapters. They have better GPAs, they have more engagement and better execution of the BMP. They have better member retention. They win more campus awards. They have better relationships with their volunteers, et cetera. But said differently, successful recruitment is the leading indicator of a successful chapter. Also, we're going to be freeing up some of the regional directors' time by hiring some new positions that provide value directly to executive officer positions. For instance, next year, we're going to have a staff member focused on supporting our vice presidents of finance and another on supporting our vice presidents of communication so that these positions receive the support that they need while RDs are investing more time in helping chapters attract and retain members. We want to be sure that all of our executive officers are being supported. We've also named our current chapter and volunteer services director, Matt Dutcher, as our director of growth, charged with providing leadership and greater focus to our expansion efforts. We're also working with our growth committee to revisit our campus selection criteria, given some of the changes that I've mentioned taking place in higher education, and to develop marketing and operational strategies that are critical to our rechartering success. We're also going to be announcing soon a search for a director of education, someone with deep experience in student development, focused on chapter officer support, our Balanced Man and SigEp learning community efforts that have the ability to impact and add value to every single member every day. So great officers and great local programming are critical to providing value to all members and therefore critical to retaining members. Lastly, our ability to move the needle in each of these areas, recruitment, retention, and total chapters, is going to require strong volunteer support. So we're also going to be thinking about how we're empowering district governors and AVCs to recruit more volunteers that can guide chapter operations and provide critical coaching to our undergraduates. If we believe it makes sense to add to our volunteer services team at some point this upcoming year, because we think we're going to be able to recruit more of our volunteers and do a better job engaging them and supporting them, we'll find a way to finance that. I think you've heard already, and you will continue to hear, that we're committed to volunteer success because it's fundamental to our success in each area of the strategic plan. So before turning it back over to Billy, I want to talk a little bit about our plans for growing the number of new members recruited. With rush numbers declining across the country, we simply have to do a better job at year-round recruitment while continuing to attract young men who are participating in rush and still motivated by the right things, the things that I mentioned earlier that lead to a healthy chapter. Our annual Brotherhood assessment data tells us that year-round recruitment and the Balanced Band Scholarship matter immensely in helping chapters find the right people. Not that that's the only way to recruit, but if we're able to do those things well, we can have deeper and better conversations with young men and ensure that they're joining our chapters for the right reasons. And if we do those things well, we can also overcome some of the declining rush numbers and other campus restrictions that may be affecting our recruitment. To enhance our year-round recruitment efforts, we've partnered with a marketing and branding agency to ramp up the marketing that we're dedicating to recruitment specifically, to high school students, to guidance counselors, parents, and more, as well as providing resources for our chapters to fully customize and use in their efforts. So similar to the previous statistic that I shared with you, interest in fraternities is at an all-time low. Only 1 in 11 freshmen arrive on campus interested and seeking to join fraternities and sororities. That's about 9%. The other 91% are either unaware of fraternities and sororities or have preconceived notions that limit their interest in joining. And when it's all said and done, like I've mentioned earlier, only 8% of college men are joining fraternities. Sigma Phi Epsilon needs a simple, compelling message that's going to resonate with college men and allow us to confront some of those trends. Again, we feel like SigEp is relevant and matters even more today than it has historically. But both likely joiners and those who need greater awareness of SigEp need to hear our message and the value that we offer. When we were making this decision, we sought a marketing agency that's capable of helping SigEp develop a branded recruitment campaign that solidifies our core message as a rallying cry for our chapters and our current members, as well as a targeted and compelling pitch for potential members. This work is going to be the basis from which we build marketing materials and refine our educational resources around recruitment for our chapters to utilize and to personalize and to make their own. So you'll see a little bit more about what we're asking that agency to specifically do on your screen. But I do also want to be clear as you're looking at this, that our work with our selected agency that was selected with our growth committee will also include undergraduates. That work is going to include undergraduates. Undergraduates have to influence the work product that is here. And we're looking forward to doing that as we also do or conduct some extensive marketing research with this marketing firm that helps us identify what the next generation of SigEps are looking for. So again, I'll try and move up the pace here, but when we talk about retaining members, I'm going to talk a little bit about that. Our focus is going to be on delivering value every day at the local level to reach as many of our members as possible with an impactful experience. And this is going to require us to better implement the Balanced Man program and SigEp learning community at every chapter, which again will demand that we get very serious about volunteer recruitment and how we engage those volunteers in the member development experience. We believe very simply the most impactful thing we can do to support the BMP right now is to get more volunteers involved in the program and empower those volunteers to execute their role effectively. We have set an ambitious goal to engage 15,000 volunteers, and that's why. And again, Billy's going to talk a little bit about this in a few minutes. Lastly, when we talk about total chapters, healthy chapters that can remain open, that will provide a great experience, they benefit from a combination of three things. They have engaged in effective volunteers. They have confident and effective chapter officers, and they are recruiting new members who are motivated to join for the right reasons. And we've got to get good at doing all three of these things for every single one of our chapters. We have gone from 230 chapters in 2015, when we implemented our BMP legislation, to 195 chapters today, because too many of our chapters lack one of these three things. Again, we have to make sure that every single chapter consistently has these three things in place. We intend to increase the number of SigEp chapters and provide the SigEp experience to more young men across the country. Over the next few years, we intend to double the number of annual startups and approach the rechartering effort differently to achieve greater success. This is going to require us to do more work on the front end of each startup. It's going to require us to take a different approach when we have staff on campus. It's going to require us to take a different approach working with volunteers to recruit and train our founding fathers. And it's going to require us to take a different approach even after staff leaves site to ensure that that new chapter is able and confidently able to successfully operate with the help of their volunteers. So lastly, this year's expansions, you see those on the screen. You'll also see next year's on the screen. The fiscal year after that, you should expect to see more than 4. And again, we look forward to sharing these updates with you and our plans for implementing what I've just shared, and talk a little bit more about how well we're doing implementing those strategies that we believe are going to lead to healthy growth. So with that said, I'm going to turn it back over to Billy and let him dig into volunteers a little bit. Billy?
Hey, Billy, make sure you're off mute. You should be good.
All right, go ahead, Billy.
Yeah, so let me just make sure that I'm, so as Brian alluded to, you know, the most direct line between a quality chapter and SigEp is recruitment of volunteers, chapter support for health and success. Growth, of course, is recruitment and retention. The Balanced Man program, SigEp learning communities, weaving mental health and inclusion resources throughout our experience is increasingly an issue that we're willing to address. We really need to recruit, retain 15,000 coaches and mentors and volunteers, and that's kind of an outrageous number because the level of engagement is unprecedented. All of the information we're looking at as a board tells us that this is mission critical and that this is the right number. We simply have to find a way to make it happen. And I want to give you some context. We currently have around 3,300 engaged volunteers, including our coaches, our career coaches, which, by the way, is more than at any time in SigEp history. And I'm told it's more than in any fraternity out there. So in other words, at 3,300, we're the tallest midget in the room, right? And it's a great number, but it's nowhere near what we need in order to be successful and do the kinds of things that we want to do. And so that effort looms large. And since we know that volunteers are our most valued asset, we're reorienting our volunteer program from top to bottom to meet the goal. So what's the path to 15,000? Our needs break down generally along operational lines that you would be familiar with. We're seeking to recruit at least one career coach for every undergraduate brother, to have an alumnus who can provide some one-on-one mentoring to help him launch his professional goals. And that's 11,000 career coaches right there toward that number. Now, one mentor for every undergraduate chapter officer to help our leaders strive to reach their goals in managing their undergraduate chapters, driving their chapters toward excellence. That adds about 1,600 to the mix. One mentor for every Balanced Man program challenge coordinator, the undergraduate leaders who implement the continuous personal development program in our chapters. Now, this directly contributes to our men having a transformational SigEp experience as well as having a healthy chapter culture. And that's 800, at least 5 alumni and volunteer corporation or AVC members for each chapter. But that's not really news, although we've never consistently had a full AVC for all of our chapters, and that's going to sort of be job one. And of course, they'll focus on corporate responsibility, finance, communication, and our real estate needs. And then that adds the final 1,000, getting us to 15,000. Now, the good news in that outrageous number is we'll have Brian Tinklinger leading the effort. He's our former district governor and, of course, a longtime SigEp volunteer. Many on the call know him. We've hired Brian as SigEp's new volunteer engagement and education director. To say Brian comes with a wealth of experience is an understatement. He most recently served as the manager for global membership and education for Kiwanis, which is a worldwide membership and service organization. And before that, he served in leadership roles across the interfraternal landscape. Brian is currently traveling the country. He's on a listening tour. He's hitting more than 20 cities in 2 months to meet with current and former and even prospective SigEp volunteers. He's actually not with us this evening, so I could probably say some things about him that I wouldn't ordinarily say, but he's meeting with a big group of volunteers tonight in St. Louis, where we just rechartered our Mo Beta chapter. Congratulations to them. On his listening tour, he's out there to gain volunteer perspective, your perspective, if you will. Listen and learn about what's working for you as a volunteer and where we need to improve so we can enrich both the value that you get from being a SigEp volunteer and the value that you provide to our chapters and undergraduate leaders. Your insight will help shape the future direction of our volunteer engagement and education program, so don't be shy. These dates and more information are on our website, and of course, they're being communicated on Facebook and across social media. We hope that each one of you will be able to attend when Brian is nearby. And, you know, if it's not possible for you, not drivable or whatever, or you're not available, we have some virtual sessions that we're going to have that you can engage in as well. So this begs the question of how will we begin to recruit volunteers? And that starts with better engaging our alumni. Not all volunteers, of course, are SigEp alumni, but that's where it starts. I'm going to toss it over to Heather, our Chief Communications Officer, who's going to provide some insight into alumni engagement and communications plans. Heather, take it away.
Yeah, thank you, Billy. So you have likely noticed us ramping up efforts to engage with alumni, starting with collecting contact information. And you've probably received a few pieces of information about that recently. And the why we're doing that is because having better data gives us the ability to communicate with our alumni and re-engage them in SigEp, and ultimately have more returning to your chapters as volunteers, have more engaged as career coaches, as mentors, as donors, and even friends that come back for homecoming. So while SigEp is quite revered in the Greek industry for how much data we have and the quality of it, it is not where we'd like to be, and our address and email data is far from where we want it to be able to advance our goals. So if the bottom line is, I'm going to transition to put something on screen here, doing two things at once real quick. Okay, the bottom line is at this time, we can only communicate with 72% of our alumni, of our 252,000 living alumni, because that's all we have either a good email or a good mailing address for. And the big issue there is we only have less than a third of their email addresses, which is the most efficient way for AVCs and for headquarters to communicate with alumni. When we do say we, when we're talking about we communicating, it does mean for you to be able to communicate too, for your volunteer corps and your AVC to be able to talk with your alumni. So we are implementing 5 key strategies that will help us engage more brothers over time. I'm going to tell you a little bit about each one as I go. The one that you've probably heard about most recently is our oral history project with PCI. We launched a communications campaign on February 28th to help us validate and find new alumni contact information. That is really what that is all about, so that we are able to engage more volunteers. It's also a way for us to collect amazing stories about the SigEp experience from alumni. And from a data perspective, the results are good. We'll talk about those, but we have heard some feedback about the approach that PCI takes, and that some can think it's a little bit pushy. So we want you to know that we've heard you, and I'll walk through what we're doing on that end too. From a data perspective, we've had more than 11,000 alumni respond in a 6-week period, sharing more than 8,000 of their personal stories. And that's exciting because that's more than 4.5% of all living alumni. And it's more than 4 times the amount of volunteers that we currently have engaged. So we are excited about that response. People are telling their stories and they're wanting to engage with us. And it's also allowing us to collect tons of new contact information so that we can have better long-term outreach with them. In terms of the feedback we've heard around the language, some of the language that PCI uses in their pitch, we are working with them to make sure that that is on brand for us moving forward. And while some people are really interested in buying a book of those SigEp stories and an oral history, digital archive, some aren't. And we want you to know that there is absolutely no obligation to purchase anything from PCI, and we are working with them on that messaging. We will continue this project throughout the summer, but we do want you to know that we hear your feedback and as well as the why behind we're doing this. The second big piece that I want to tell you more about is really about helping our volunteers and our AVCs connect with more alumni on the chapter level. We are working on crafting a formal partnership with Pennington and Company, and this is advance insight for those of you on the call. We'll have a lot more information coming out about it soon, so thanks for being here. But we are working with Pennington and Company to form a new partnership to really help AVCs and chapters connect with alumni. The why behind this is that we know data tells us and alumni tell us that their strongest connection to SigEp is often through their chapter. It's where they build their bonds. It's where they found the mentors. It's where they found coaching and developed leadership skills, and had a really fun time and brotherly love doing it, right? But we know that, as we've talked about tonight, only about 1% of our living alumni are involved as volunteers, and only about 1.8% of them donate. And so we want to change that, and it's really about connecting at the local level. As you can see, we did a survey of all alumni around communication in 2020. And what we know is that over 90% of our alumni say that they're interested in chapter news and updates, and they want to hear more. Yet only a third of those are satisfied with the amount of communication they get from the local chapter. That is the thing that they most want to know about. So our partnership with Pennington, which is a nationally renowned fundraising and communications firm, will pair AVCs with them to be able to send your chapter alumni regular newsletter communications, both digitally and via mail, as well as fundraising appeals at the chapter level. It'll provide a service to you as AVCs that will help you foster volunteer recruitment and engagement, help you cultivate donors for things that are important to you, and really also bolster our ability to collect that contact information long term. We think it'll really benefit the chapter. We think it'll benefit the AVC. It'll benefit you with everything from housing to programming, as well as the fraternity at large. Some of your chapters may already be in a communications partnership with Pennington and doing newsletters. And this is really an enhanced version of that. We'll have a bank of content that you can pull from. We'll have quotes from your students who attended leadership programs, photos that you can pull from to make your job communicating easier, enhanced design, branded templates, and better managed data. So all of those things are things that we've talked to AVCs about their needs and wanting a better take at. And then overall, if you already have a partnership with Pennington or you would seek one out, we're able to do this at a more affordable rate for you. So look for more information about that later this month. We will be taking a limited number of AVCs for this fall as we get this up and running and look to expand it in the spring. So we look forward to sharing more about that in the coming month. The other few things that we're doing to really bolster our alumni engagement, we're going to launch what's called a Lost Brothers campaign in the future, because we know the best way to connect with alumni is through alumni, and we'll work with chapters and AVCs to help you find lost brothers or brothers that we don't have contact information for. So it'll be a big communications campaign as well. And then finally, I'm excited to share that the SigEp Journal, our beloved magazine publication, is going back in print here very soon. Next month, you'll receive that in the mail. And so as a part of that, we know how excited everyone is. We've also updated the design. We took the time to do that with it being out of print for the pandemic. Updated the design, found new ways to tell stories of brotherly love, progress, and achievements. And we're really excited it'll be hitting mailboxes soon. One of the things that was a concern previously when we were mailing the journal is that we were finding we were getting so many, hundreds of them and really thousands of them back in the mail because people were moving or not updating their addresses and addresses were incorrect. So as you've heard tonight, we've done a ton of work on cleaning up that data. But we're also going to go into a campaign where we ask alumni to opt in and confirm their address to receive the journal. And so I'll share a little bit about that. And the other thing is, in addition to having so many returns and so many sent to bad addresses, a lot of alumni actually reached out when we started to send it digitally via email saying, hey, can I actually only get this digitally? I'd love to save on sustainability and resources. So those two things paired together, we are moving into a campaign where we're going to ask alumni to opt in to receive the journal. What I'll need you to hear, though, is that anyone who's actively engaged with the fraternity is automatically going to receive it. So if you have ever ever had a volunteer role, ever received a SigEp National Award, ever donated to the foundation, ever attended a program, ever served on staff, you will receive the journal. You are already opted in. So it's really people who haven't engaged since graduation in any way like that we're reaching out to via mail and via email saying, hey, please tell us your address is correct. It's time. You probably haven't updated it in a while. Please update your address and opt in to receive the journal. We want to make sure we're getting it to the right place. So that you will see information about that as early as next week, and we are excited to mail the journal in May. So Brian, I am going to pass it back over to you to wrap us up.
Sounds good. Thanks, Heather. I'm going to close with just an update on some things regarding programming. And Heather, there are a couple of good questions about the program that you just referenced in the chat that we may want to flag and come back to. Just want to make sure that we don't miss those. So on programming over the last 2 years, there's been a lot of change in this area out of necessity. We navigated the pandemic by shifting to virtual opportunities for Ruck, Carlson, Tragos, and even basic chapter services. And that was the way that we could reach our brothers, undergrads, and volunteers safely. And as we've said before in other stakeholder calls, that during that period, we were really challenged to think about the purpose and the desired outcomes of everything we do, and to look at the data to honestly assess whether or not we were being good stewards of undergraduate and donor dollars, whether or not we were achieving our desired outcomes, and whether or not we were really advancing the mission the most efficient and effective way possible. That reflection led to a commitment to what I'll call several tenets that are influencing our path back to programming normalcy, if you will. The first is we need to start identifying potential officers and developing them earlier, before they're elected. So one, recruit the right undergraduates, ensure that they are being elected to office, and that those leaders are helped to find their stride as early as possible in their term. Having confident, prepared, and philosophically aligned chapter leadership can make all the difference in the world for a chapter and its success. So this thinking led to the testing of our Springboard program, offered virtually in the fall for potential officers. The program is facilitated by outstanding chapter leaders, so it's peer-to-peer, and it focuses on philosophical alignment and leadership basics, the things that we want in our officers. In its first year this fall, the program had 82 attendees, with many, many more watching the recorded sessions. But what I really wanted to share is that 94% of the future officers who attended said they found it valuable, and 100% said that they would recommend it to a brother next year. So it tells us that we may be hitting the mark here or getting close to it. That said, we hope to develop a financing plan to make this program an in-person experience in the future, because we've certainly seen over the last few years that in-person experiences are much preferred to what is taking place virtually. The second tenet that I wanted to share is we found that we need to do more for our chapter officers throughout their term. We need to provide them what they need when they need it, versus spending 24 hours drinking from a fire hose that is shut off immediately after the Carlson concludes. And that may be a little bit of a dramatic way of putting it, but we need to extend the learning experience throughout the term. And that effort needs to also include or consider how staff can work with and empower local volunteers to support undergraduates throughout their term. So this thinking led to the concept of a national transition retreat. This is our second year doing it. How are we bringing officers together to bond as a team very soon after being elected, to set goals early in their term, before Carlson, and to complement whatever is happening locally in terms of a retreat? This year, we had 65 chapters participating in the retreat, and we had volunteers that were able to engage in this experience with their chapter. It provided an opportunity for that volunteer or those volunteers to interact and help the chapter think strategically and to help with goal setting. And here, of those who responded to our survey, 100% of the chapter leaders agreed that they understand what their top priorities are or need to be to improve their chapter. And 100% of their leaders agreed that they felt confident to implement what we call during the retreat above the line thinking in their role. This tenet led to also the creation of the cohort concepts that we launched at Carlson this year, intended to keep officers connected throughout their term and allow them to work through a virtual learning calendar together beyond Carlson. And this change, again, was made to address the perennial feedback that we received from officers that they want to spend more time with their peers, learning from their peers, and that they didn't have enough time to talk about everything they wanted to discuss at the prior Carlson Academy. So at this Carlson, we sought to give our facilitators smaller groups so that there was more talking, and to give them more time with officers when they are together in person to strengthen the bond in the cohort, which we think will have a positive impact for engagement with their facilitators and in their monthly virtual training with their cohort. The survey results from this year said we're moving the program in a positive direction to a more effective place, and addressing the program's initial intent around leadership development and officer training. And you can see from the results on the screen here that every measure that we looked at is higher than it was in 2020, and which was our last Carlson Academy under the previous model. And even more so, 71% of the facilitators at this year's Carlson who had experienced the prior model said that this year's Carlson is an improvement over the previous curriculum. So again, the focus being on the undergraduate development portion of Carlson. And we're going to provide, as Billy alluded to in his opening comments, we'll provide an impact report on this later this month that should have even more information and facilitate an even better discussion about what we can do to further strengthen the Carlson experience and the support that we provide our chapter officers. So lastly, to extend learning and cohort engagement beyond Carlson and throughout the executive officer's term, we've continued our monthly executive development offering. This is a virtual experience where chapter officers are hearing from an incredible alumnus on a leadership topic, and that it provides them an opportunity to spend time with their cohort that began at the Carlson Academy. This program's participation this spring, we're seeing an attendance up 86% over what we saw last fall. And we're continuing to assess and tweak what we do here to drive attendance and engagement up even further. So even though on a percentage basis that increase is significant, we're still not close to where we want to be with undergraduates engaging post Carlson with their cohort. So we're trying to live and learn and respond quickly, and we're doing some things this April that are different than what we did last March and our first virtual engagement, our monthly executive development session. So next year, just to put a fine point on this, we are going to include all 8 executive officers in Carlson. We're able to do that because of the generosity of our donors, as well as some of the certainty that we're seeing with the experience today. And I can talk a little bit more about that later. We're also working with our volunteer development committee that is chaired by Wendell Rakowski to define the volunteer experience, what it can look like at future Carlson Academies and even beyond. And as we do those things, we're also talking about ways that we can bring volunteers and alumni together, because we heard how much that matters to you, many of you on this call, and we're committed to making that happen. We've talked about the importance of volunteers during this call, and you need to know that you're important to SigEp's success, and we want you to feel just how appreciative the board, the staff, the undergraduates are for everything that you do to make the SigEp experience what it is. And now that we're getting back to this somewhat of normalcy, we're going to find even other ways beyond programs to bring people together regionally. So I also wanted to mention that RUC is going to be offered this June in Richmond at the University of Richmond. Applications closed on March 1. We had over 550 applications. That's 15% more than we had the last time we offered the program in person. And that's also after engaging over 400 students in virtual RUC the last 2 years. So there's the need, there's the excitement to get back to this in-person program, the Ruck Leadership Institute. And again, I just want to underscore that we can't do the things that we're talking about today without the generosity of SigEp donors. In November, last November, we had a record-breaking Founders Day of Giving. We raised over $900,000, and we've continued to see incredible generosity from our donors throughout this fiscal year. We really needed to see it in order to get to some level of certainty and back to some level of normalcy with our programs and the services that we offer to our chapters. It's only because of that generosity that we can get back to having all of our officers attending Carlson, that we can keep the Ruck registration at $500 and not raise it, that we can scale our career coaching and provide that experience to more of our undergraduates, that we can talk about other opportunities to provide better programming and services to our undergraduates. The generosity of donors just put us in such an advantageous position as we look forward and try to make the SigEp experience even better. So with that said, I'll turn it back to you, Heather. You can open us up to the Q&A. Thank you, everyone.
All right, we have lots of questions coming in. To go ahead and take care of one big one, a lot of people are like, I want to share this news with other people on my AVC or my mentor board or other SigEps I know. We will be sending this recording out on Friday, and it will include, you'll see the slides, you'll see all of the information. So. And shifting to Q&A, we know you probably have a lot of questions on your mind. You've heard a lot of information, statistics, seen progress reports, all of those things. So please do put questions in the Q&A box and I'll answer those. I am grouping them together as they come in. So for example, if we have a lot about programming, we'll take those as a set. So not if I miss you and you think, oh, I just put it in, why hasn't she said it? Just know that we'll get to it. So if we run out of time at all, we will follow up with you after, or if you have a question about your specific chapters. So for example, if you say, I really want to know this about Louisiana Beta, because there are 120 people on the call, we'll follow up with you about a specific chapter situation after. Okay, we will go ahead and get started here. So I will take the first one here. Brian, can you talk more about our expansion chapters, our startups this year, and what is their average size? How are those going, and how does it compare to either past results or what we're seeing in the industry?
Let me make sure I'm not on mute. Yep. Sure, Heather. Thank you. I will actually, if you give me a second, I can bring up what the live numbers are. I'll preface this by saying, because I saw this question pop up earlier, asking for some performance numbers from a few years ago. The pandemic year, last year, we did not have any expansions because we did focus our attention on supporting the chapters that are open and that we knew were going to struggle through a year of just chaos and challenges and headwinds. And so there was not any last year. This year, we did go to 4: Cal Poly, St. Louis Obispo, Case Western, Dartmouth, and Rutgers. And I'll also add, for the last few years, I think we've seen our numbers in terms of total men that we recruit during our expansion be a little bit lower. That led us to reach out to some of our peers and ask them what they are seeing. And they shared with us that they're seeing some of the things that we have experienced as of late. Our peers are seeing average expansions start between 15 and 20 men, which is very abnormal. We're also seeing sororities not reach total when they go to a campus, which is also unheard of. And that, I think, just underscores a lot of the things that we've talked about on this call of needing to approach what we're doing differently, given the changes in the environment today. And so we are approaching expansions differently, everything from site selection to what we do 18 months out, to what we do on site, to what we're going to do after the fact to grow a chapter and get them to a place where they have a critical mass of people who are able to build and sustain a strong chapter. So even at a place like Cal Poly St. Louis Obispo, we've extended 53 bids. We had 42 bids accepted there, but we also saw some attrition at that campus, and we've seen some attrition at other places as well. At Rutgers, we're at 34 accepted. We've had some attrition there. At Case Western, we've had 26 bids accepted. We've also seen a little bit of attrition there. And Dartmouth is a little bit abnormal because of some of the policies on that campus, where first-year students can't join. You have to be a second-year student. So a lot of what we're doing today is focused on upperclassmen and cultivating younger students that we can begin offering bids to when they become a second year. So we're still at 10 members at Dartmouth, but have a lot of opportunity to extend bids and have those bids accepted in future terms at Dartmouth. So that one, we really look a little bit, or really look forward in a different way and try to staff and think about that one a little bit differently than the other three.
Couple of programming questions. We had a couple of folks ask, will we still be offering virtual rec for those who maybe weren't accepted to in-person or those who couldn't make it to Richmond?
Yeah, we're wrestling with that. You've probably heard references to resource allocation a couple times on this call. And as much as we want to do everything, we know that there's some things that we may not be able to do. There was a lot of great feedback around virtual ruck. As we get to a place where we can do things in person, I think we're seeing a lot more energy around what can we do when people come together. And so we want to listen to that and figure out what we can do to facilitate better in-person programming, particularly in-person chapter-specific activities. You heard us talk about the BMP and the SigEp learning community today, and what we can do to impact every brother every day and the impact that can have. So that's kind of what we're wrestling with right now when we think about virtual ruck versus alternatives to investing in that.
Got it. On the programming front as well, Paul Litcher asked, what is the participation like for the follow-up cohort program? So monthly executive development after they have attended Carlson. Has that improved? Can you tell us more about that?
Yeah, so first off, our goal is this year to get that to 50% of our cohorts participating on monthly development calls. And even 50% feels low, but we know that there's going to be conflicts that young men are going to have with this. And in some cases, they're going to have to listen to a recording, or they're going to have to follow up with their cohort and engage with them in other ways. So while we were up 86%, we're still closer to 15 to 17% of cohorts members engaging with their cohort in our first month. We found that to be low. We got some great feedback that said, hey, why don't we think about doing things the way that we did at Virtual Ruck? And so we're making that tweak in April, and we hope that greater flexibility there and allowing cohorts to really define their calendar will lead to greater attendance.
Another person said everyone left Carlson this year really energized, heard great feedback on the new programming from his chapters, but that energy can die after. How do we enhance the energy and keep it going? And it sounds like the plan really is for that monthly executive development to keep that energy going with the cohort.
Yeah, I think that's it. That's exactly it. It's we want to provide a process where guys can continue to engage and organically even engage between cohort sessions, so that we're developing relationships, we're learning from each other, we're talking through problems and problem solving together. And it doesn't have to wait until the next session. It can just continue because you have developed that relationship with your cohort and your facilitator, and they become a sounding board for you beyond what you have locally with your other executive officers and your local volunteers.
Talked a lot about undergraduate programming. Here's one from Mike Hart around volunteers. You spoke a lot about the need for engaged and effective volunteers. The vast majority of training is focused on undergrads. So what's the plan to develop or deliver more robust volunteer training?
Well, I made mention to a volunteer development committee. There was a charge at the last conclave that we needed to create one, and that it should be one that exists in perpetuity, because we're leaning into the volunteer space and have tied our volunteer success to the success of everything else that we do. So they just came back this last week with a proposal for what they think that we should do long-term, kind of what their vision is. And we're now wrestling with, okay, let's think about if that's the best thing to do. How do we resource that? How do we make sure that we can bring this vision to life? And that group is moving very quickly. We've got great volunteers on that committee. You've heard us praise Brian, our new staff member leading the volunteer charge. He's excellent as well. This is moving fast. And so we hope to be doing more of our volunteer training this upcoming year. We'll make some I think some good announcements and updates around what we intend to do to reach our 15,000 number, and what our plans are to train and educate and empower those people as they're recruited as well.
We have one from Paul Anderson. He's asking how the SigEp Learning Community Program is going, and are we seeing more chapters applying and becoming accredited?
Another great question, and I'm going to pull up something. If you can just give me a moment, we'll get some fresh numbers here. So I know we've got some Texas Alpha guys on the call, so they'll be happy to hear me give Bruce Anderson a shout out for his leadership with our SigEp Learning Community Committee. We currently have 67 of our chapters conditionally or fully accredited as a SigEp Learning Community. 86 chapters have a faculty fellow. So if you look at that gap, you'll see that there's some chapters that are well on their way to being accredited as well. These are all-time highs for SigEp. And I think this is a result of us being much more coordinated in this area, much more focused on getting this number up, sharing the application and expectations a little bit more clearly as well. And we're seeing chapters, as they always do, rise to the challenge. And it's something that I think our volunteers and campus partners get very excited about as well. So the numbers are looking good, and we're going to continue to see them tick up every time we have one of these calls.
We had a couple of questions around retention. One from Jay Hurt. Do we have any data or information around what retention looks like over time? Are our juniors and seniors, are they sticking around? And how does that compare to previous years?
Yeah, so this is something that we're digging into, Jay. I mean, the pandemic was really disruptive here. And, we talked about an increase in new member recruitment, and we thought that we were going to see a little bit larger of a jump in total membership around the PMR, but retention became an issue in the pandemic, and that's something that we've tried to underscore the importance of in this call, to see that retention stays high. So I think it's something that we're going to have to go back and really look at to understand just how things evolved during the pandemic to get to where we are today. So let us dig into that a little bit more and share that. It is a lot easier to run retention calculations when we have our members on my SigEp. And so the more people we can get on that using the SigEp platform, the easier it is to provide this type of analysis to you and understand really what's going on and why people join, why people leave, that we can dig into to this issue much deeper there.
Couple of questions around insurance member safety. So one from Van Auger, he asks, any updates to share on what our insurance market looks like? Have we seen any downward premium trends? That would be great. And are we continuing to explore alternatives in that market?
Yeah. Billy, jump in if you want to talk about any of this stuff too. So don't feel like you've got to be quiet here. I'll jump into Van's question though, and say that we should be receiving our client advocacy report very soon. That's kind of the, hey, here's what to expect at the upcoming renewal. Our renewal is July 1, and so we will, with all the things that are happening in Greek life today, we typically get our renewal in June, which we hate, because it is kind of a last minute big number that affects our budget, and then things have to move. But I think what we saw during the pandemic is that alcohol consumption went up. It went up significantly in other organizations, and some of the statistics around alcohol consumption, risk, and behavior did not come down for those chapters or those organizations post-pandemic, the way that SigEps improved. And so the challenge for us continues to be, how do we distinguish ourselves from our peers and provide our insurance carrier the data, the compelling data that says we are approaching this experience thoughtfully and our strategies are making an impact. This is our 6th year of no losses for our carrier. And we've had a couple incidents that I think we would call frivolous that have to be resolved, and those have been within the self-insurance retention. So we continue to push for no increase, if possible a decrease. I suspect that given some of the pressures on the insurance market, that a 0% change year over year is going to be a huge win. And even if we see a few percentage points increase in premium year over year, we're going to do everything we can to not pass that off in a spring bill, because we know that our chapters are doing the right things. And that's why we've got 6 years of great loss run. I tried to be as specific as I could, Van. I mean, if you want to have a follow-up, please type it in there and we'll keep going.
Mm-hmm.
Well, this is Billy. I just want to remind everybody on the call that, probably the best we can hope for going forward, given our marketplace, is no increase at all or very small increases, because our peers are seeing substantial, like game over type increases that are unsustainable over the long haul. And the other thing that just weighs on me significantly is that we're our undergraduates are paying $1 million a year plus in insurance and getting nothing for it. I mean, apologies to the insurance guys on the call, but $1 million a year that could be going to so many other productive things. So it is a crisis situation that just never seems to go away. We're doing our part. 6 years, no claims, good stuff. But we are insured in a marketplace that has one insurance provider, and it's really just a toxic market. And so we're resigned to the fact that until or if we find some kind of true reimagined alternative to traditional insurance, this is probably as good as it's ever going to get. That's just the reality of it. It's a sober reality, but I think it's important for all of us to understand what we're looking at here.
We have a couple related to alumni involvement. So Bill Heydrich asks, do we reach out to alumni from closed chapters, or how are they included as we seek to build our volunteer corps? And Marcus Barahona asked a similar question around, can we connect alumni who live in different states, so away from their local chapter, with those nearby? So thoughts on engaging alumni either from closed chapters or that don't necessarily live by their home chapter?
We need volunteers. Yes. And I think when we start, as I mentioned earlier, as we start rolling out plans for the path to 15,000, we're going to see answers to those questions. I know very specifically we need to get better at data, and Heather talked about that, because that's a gateway to communicating with more people and re-engaging those people as volunteers. We also need to do a better job of empowering our AVCs to recruit on their own and fill their vacancies on their own. And we need to do a better job of supporting our district governors in that effort as well. And so I think when we look at this, if we're good in those three areas, then we're going to be moving at a pretty good clip towards the 15,000 number. And I think there was a question about, can closed chapters enroll in this alumni communications program? And the answer is yes. I mean, the intent there is that we're talking to all of our alumni. We're sharing good news with all of our alumni. We're engaging all of our alumni in SigEp. The story may be a little bit different during a period of dormancy, but eventually that groundswell of support can lead to a chapter. And successful chapters have great volunteers. And so if we're using this communication program the way it's intended, years in advance of restarting a chapter even, that can lead to great outcomes.
Yeah, agreed. And a couple of questions about that program. One was, if a chapter has had a long-term relationship with Pennington, will our rates be reduced as part of the program? And the answer to that is yes. And we are excited to share that because we are able to work with so many of our chapters. We are able to do that with Pennington, provide the service that you're getting at a reduced rate, but also to enhance it. And so to give you content, to make the lift easier and make communicating easier for you, to make the to make the product, the actual newsletter, digital and mail itself, a better product and a more engaging product for your alumni. So again, we'll be following up over the course of the next month about opportunities for engagement in that program. A couple of additional communications questions. John Vericelino, sorry about if I mispronounced that, John. Thank you for all of your great engagement tonight. But you asked, will opt-ins for email delivery of the journal be required? Nope. If we have your email address, which we do because you got the invite to this call, you will receive the journal via email as well as mail. Let's see. Okay. John Allen asked a question. John Allen from Louisiana Beta asked a question about, how do chapter counselors fit into the chart relative to the volunteer goal of over 15,000? So how are they in our big picture?
Every chapter has to have one. This person leads the mentoring effort at a chapter, and so we need to have them involved. Interestingly, we just had a conversation with Gentry McCreary at Dyad, and he pointed out all of the positive correlations between having a chapter counselor in place and how that leads to such great results for a chapter. So if you're talking, John, specifically about that table, it's likely in there somewhere. The math is loose, so please don't think it's being excluded in any way. That's a critical position, and one of them is, as Billy mentioned, we've got to have it filled. And unfortunately, we've just got a bad track record of not being able to get all of our chapters to have that position filled.
Let me see if I can bring up the chart here. pretty easily. And we will do that. Yeah, John, it is right in here for as we look at our mentor boards, and so the mentors for the officers. So it's the top line, most important there, one of the most important roles. Okay, let's see here. We have Chris Yergis asks, are any resources being cultivated to help AVCs maintain good corporate health? For example, tax advice, maintaining C7 status, budgeting. What do we have going on in that realm? And I know it's a lot, so I'm excited for you to share, Brian.
Yeah, so we were talking about earlier, actually, when we talked about staffing and growth, having a position that is supporting our VPs of finance, that position is also going to be able to influence some of the things that are being raised here. We just know that finances are so important. We consistently have challenges with budgeting, collection, and tax filing, and there needs to be some consistency there to support both our chapters and our AVCs. So it is a priority. It is something not beyond or not just resources, but I think ongoing services is something we want to make sure is a part of the answer here, because we have a track record, I think, as an organization of having a resource, putting it online, and it becomes worthless if people aren't able to find it and there's no one servicing around that resource. So the service piece becomes just as important as the resource development here. We want to make sure we're able to do both.
A great one from Andrew, who's worked with Indiana Beta. If a chapter starts to waver on substance-free facilities, but they've got a great GPA, brotherhood is strong, community involvement is strong, how do we convince them that substance-free is still the way to go? And what are you seeing in the data around substance-free facilities?
The data today is the same as it was in 2016 and 2017 when we decided to go down this path. The chapters that are consistently enforcing it and have it be a part of the culture are the ones that have higher GPAs, better member engagement, win more campus awards, are lower risk, and every single thing there, if the chapter is doing it well, they outperform. And I think what we would have to do, Andrew, and this is probably a long conversation, is just to sit down and understand really what the underlying concerns are with embracing that concept, because it's probably not what's being talked about at the surface. And we found that when we went down this path in 2015, 2016, and 2017, before that conclave vote, where there was a lot of unique conversations, chapter specific conversations, and a lot of peer-to-peer conversations, chapter president to chapter president and officers to officers, about why this is the path that SigEp needs to go down. And it sounds like a lot of those conversations probably need to resurface at Indiana, and we need to connect some of those guys with officers of other successful chapters that they can relate to.
Yeah, I think something else I found really interested from our brotherhood assessment this year, which I'm excited for you all to hear on, Billy's Off Script on Purpose video series coming out next week about it, is that our satisfaction rates, so brothers expressing how satisfied they are in the experience, are at an all-time high. And it really is the first cycle where we've had 4 years of, look, you came in, you were recruited, knowing we were substance free and buying into the BMP, or understanding the BMP, and freshmen, sophomore, junior, senior, all members were recruited under those pretenses and are now living under those pretenses. And even if they question it or tell you they question it, what they are saying is that they are satisfied with their experience, and they in a higher level than we've seen previously. So I think that is is good news and speaks to if we sell the product that is real, that is reality, that makes a difference too. We have a couple of questions around, can you talk about committee work? So what is going on or able to be shared around our mental health efforts as well as diversity, equity, and inclusion?
So first off, I'll remind everybody that we're going to be sharing these quarterly updates that our committees are putting out. And so let me talk specifically about DEI first. And pardon me for reading, but I'm going to go back to their quarterly report and share some of the information that was provided from the DEI committee. So they report as being completed and continuing implemented staff training to increase cultural competence using intercultural developmental inventory, IDI. This training was facilitated by 3 trained higher ed professionals, 2 of whom happen to be on the DEI committee. And it's being delivered again this year because we will do it every year as we have staff turnover. So that is something that is being implemented. Also being implemented is a communications calendar across our social media challenges. I think the feedback here was, hey, we need to be able to highlight brothers from diverse identities and backgrounds, especially in months of celebration. And so Heather and her team have done, I think, a great job of incorporating that into their communication calendar and engaging brothers and sharing stories that have not historically been shared on SigEp's communication channels. We've also researched and implemented some inclusive HR practices for hiring and beyond. And there's some staff members who have received training certifications in this area offered by the University of South Florida. We're working to implement this into our fraternity services team. I think if you look at the staff today, you'd say that it's much more diverse than it has been historically. But if you look at the fraternity services team specifically, you may not say the same thing. And so that's something that we're working or looking at specifically with respect to hiring. And there's just a deeper conversation probably to go into there in terms of what's taking place at the chapter level and with membership that is really the hiring pool for our fraternity services team, our regional directors and our chapter and volunteer services directors, our expansion officers, et cetera, that there's something that we need to fix there or address there in order to make headway in this space. You've heard us reference dyad strategies in the Brotherhood survey in this. So we've incorporated some questions into that survey that are going to help us really understand not just how SigEp is looking in terms of demographics, but also look at some things in terms of competence and how we can educate in a manner that moves those competence scores in our chapters and in the organization in general. There are several, and I think I'll maybe stop here, or we'll go in like another 10 minutes. But there are things that I'll say generally that are big topics of conversation beyond addressing everything that was passed at conclave that our DEI committee is addressing. There's also this intense focus on what we can do to help vice presidents of DEI. It's a position that we're seeing more frequently at chapters. What we can do to support local balance band program activities, how those are integrated into the experience. Those are the things that the committee is continuing to wrestle with and we'll come back to.
And some of those big things at conclave.
Yeah, and Brian,
oh, sorry.
Billy, I'll jump in just.
Go for it, Billy.
I was just going to jump in real quickly on the mental health.
Please. Yeah, please.
So I've been updating me regularly, and the mental health committee has a white paper that they're going to be delivering to the board at our May retreat, and it will contain a series of recommendations for some beta testing. They assure me that it's programming that's going to be driven down to the chapter. It's not going to be driven out of Richmond. Resources will obviously probably need to flow largely from there, but the programming will be chapter based, and all the of course in front and have the board resource perspective, and of course make sure that it's consistent with our strategic plan. So I'm excited about it. I think there's some good stuff on the horizon, and that committee's been just yeoman's work. Lots of different directions that we can go on that. And I think they've sort of settled on an appropriate space for SigEp to try to play in on this most important issue, and I look forward to being able to share that with everybody soon.
Okay, we are right at 9:29, so want to be conscious of time. We do have a few questions left in the hopper, so I'll follow up with those after the webinar. But Brian and Billy, closing thoughts. We had more than 120 folks with us this evening. Closing thoughts for our volunteers and our donors who are so generous with their time and their talent and their treasure.
Billy, please. Go first.
Well, I always like to say, this is the most important resource we have, is our people. And if we had to pay you, we'd be broke. We couldn't afford you. You're appreciated, and like most organizations, we come up short when it comes to really demonstrating you are and appreciating you appropriately. But believe me, I don't say that as yourself. I don't say that lightly, and we appreciate what you're doing. And I think that so many people are on this call and asking such appropriate questions tonight is just proof that SigEp is headed in the right direction. Now we've got some challenges, and our market is a tough market, and the pandemic has just made everything screwy. But we're on it. I like our staff. I like the board. I think we're on top of things, but nothing that comes out of Richmond is worth a damn without you. So just know that you're appreciated, and hugs and kisses from the GP.
Thanks, Billy. I think I'll piggyback a lot of the things that Billy has said. I've been on our staff for a while. This is the most excited that I've ever been about what we're talking about doing and what we're planning to do and what we have the potential to do. And I want to underscore what Billy has said. We wouldn't be having these conversations if it wasn't for the people who are on this call. And a lot of the people who are on this session tonight have been involved for years, decades. And you need to know that we are here having these conversations today because of all of the great work that you have done. And I hope that you're proud of that. To Billy's point, we probably don't say thank you enough for that, but we sincerely appreciate it more than you know. And nothing that we do would be worth a damn, as Billy said, if it wasn't for our volunteers. And we need to get better at that area, getting more of our volunteers or of our alumni involved as volunteers, supporting those volunteers and saying thank you to those volunteers. That's what makes us so good. So we're committed to doing that work. We've got a lot of great things that we've talked about tonight that we really need to tackle. We're excited to do it and excited to do it with you. Thank you.